I know speakers always say that this is a critical time. I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and I would say that this is the most critical time that I can recall. But it is one of the responsibilities we have. And I would say that this is a unique time for us to look at those responsibilities. And you know, every week the Torah reading has some special message for our contemporary times. And this past week we read about the instructions that were given to the priests in the temple. It says, Emor al Kohanim, say this to the Kohanim, to the priests. And then it says the words again, Varmat aleim, and say to them. So the question is, why does it have to say it twice? And he said the first time was an instruction to them. The second time was that they should realize what a privilege it is. That too often the messages we convey, you know, the old Yiddish expression, it's schwer zu sein a Yid, it's difficult to be a Jew. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the great scholar, told once at a bar mitzvah, after a rabbi got up and started telling the bar mitzvah boy all the burdens and all the problems, he said, you're wrong. You have to talk about the joy and the victory and the celebrations, the positive aspects. Too often we get caught up in the negatives, but we can't avoid them at the same time. You can't shirk your responsibility. Moses taught us that the greatest dangers to the Jewish people are not natural disasters or wars by enemies against us. The greatest danger to us is ignorance, apathy, and indifference. Those are the things the Jewish people could never afford. Maybe others think they can separate themselves from the world. They don't have to face reality. Disraeli once said, there's no fate more ghastly than a stupid Jew. He didn't mean our IQs. He meant Jews who don't get it. Jews who don't understand the world as it is, not as we would like it to be, and who don't face that reality. And it doesn't matter if you come from the left or the right, it's irrelevant. And whether you're a Democrat or a conservative or a Republican or a liberal, those things are irrelevant when it comes to facing reality. All of us have a responsibility. And too often, we like to shirk that responsibility. We don't want to face reality, or we become accustomed to it. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 defining issues of our time. And what have in common, you will see in a few minutes. But the one thing that we learn, it's that what we do determines the success of our enemies. It's not what they do. It's what we allow them to do. When the Jews came out of slavery in Egypt, the Torah tells us that God took them out mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, from under the oppression of Egypt. But the word sivlot, they say, comes from the same word, savlanut, as patience. That as long as the Jews accepted slavery, as long as they accepted the harsh treatment, then the slavery continued. When they said no more, we're not going to accept it. More bricks, less straw, more dangers, more encumbrances. And they said no more. Now God said you're ready to be redeemed. Because you have to be free psychologically. You have to be free mentally before you can be freed physically. 70 years ago, we saw the same thing. How many in Europe said, how much worse can it get? When Hitler cut us off from commerce, from education, they said, okay, that's as far. He'll never carry it out. All the newspapers on January 31st, 1933, go and look at them. New York Times, page 3, Hitler gives up on being a dictator. Von Ribbentrop will never let him implement his racist ideology. All the papers called him a Charlie Chaplin-esque figure. Did not want to face reality. But even many in the Jewish community didn't want to face it. German Jews did not want to face it. In my own family, my grandparents and others who lived there. And I've studied this in great depth because of it, to try to understand what is the dynamic of it. And what was the dynamic here in America? How did Jews get up on November 10th, 1938, the night after Kristallnacht? How did they have breakfast? How did they go about life after that? The New York Times reported what happened. But they reported that 200 synagogues, 100 dozens actually, they said. We now know through a project we're involved in that 1,550 synagogues were destroyed in the aftermath of Kristallnacht. But they didn't want to face the reality. Too often, that is our approach. And that gives license to those who seek to oppress us, not just us, but all people. This is a universal lesson. It's only when you say no more, when you're willing to stand up to it, when you're willing to challenge. But first step to that is recognizing what the nature of the dangers are. And today the dangers have even a greater implication and complexity because of globalization. Globalization, it's not just about economics, it's about politics. It's that every issue, when I came to New York to head the Soviet Jewry movement, it was a big thing, Russia, an empire, the Soviet Union. But you didn't have to think about what were the implications in Indonesia or in Turkey. But today you can't deal with any issue unless you look at all the ramifications globally, because everything is interrelated. You can't talk about Iran without talking about South America or Africa, or you're not going to get it. So everything today is interrelated, and it adds the complexity. You can't separate the domestic agenda and the international agenda. You see how a rogue trader in one country can affect all the others. That bonds going bad in Greece shakes up the whole European Union, could bring a collapse to them. So today we are living in a different era where the issues, by their very nature and by the complexity of the world in which we live, and so the decisions that are being made today are not going to be decisions for years or even decades. They're going to be for generations. And your grandchildren will look back and ask you, what did you do? 70 years ago, they said they didn't know. We know from the archives that have been opened that the Allies knew every day how many Jews were being killed. There's a book, Eavesdropping on Hell, written by a Defense Department decoder who details how they knew. They broke the codes, but they never revealed it because they didn't want the Nazis to know they broke the codes. So you look at the records and it says 1,500 marauders, 2,000 plunderers. Those are code words for Jews as the Nazis marched into East Europe and towards Russia. They knew every day, even before Operation Reinhard, when 2,224,000 Jews were killed in a little over a month in Lublin, Treblinka, Sobibor, and 3 other camps. I once asked the British Prime Minister, why didn't you reveal it at Nuremberg? Why did you wait 60 years? Because they lived a lie. They said they didn't know. It was a lie. They didn't want to know. 300 reporters gathered in the White House a week after Kristallnacht, and they asked President Roosevelt what his reaction was. He said, I'm outraged. They said, what are you going to do for German Jewish refugees? And he didn't answer and ended the press conference. The next morning, a bill was introduced in the House of Representatives to allow 20,000 German Jewish children into the United States. And Roosevelt's cousin, the wife of the Secretary of Immigration, got up and said in front of the Congress, 20,000 adorable children become 20,000 ugly adults. And the bill was defeated. Hitler told his chief of staff, we're free to do what we want with the Jews, the world doesn't care. Indeed, the world did not care. Today, there is no cloak of ignorance to hide our shame. We know everything. If you read the daily alert that we put out, you can get it every day, morning in your computer, free. So you should all sign up at dailyalert.org. That's a free commercial. You go on the internet, you go on cable TV, you see things even before they happen. I mean, we see everything. We know everything. But just as we judge a generation of 70 years ago, I'm telling you, your grandchildren are going to judge you and ask, what did you do? How did you respond to the dangers that I'm going to talk about? Because you know about all of them. Were you willing to face up to them? Were you willing to take the challenge? And what I see today, I begin to understand what as a child I could never understand about the reaction of people, is that we raise the bar on what we're prepared to tolerate. That people say things today wouldn't have dared to say 10 years ago. But not because of them, but because of us. That we keep saying we can take more, we can accept it. Things that were marginally acceptable on the fringes are today acceptable on the mainstream. And it's become increasingly so. And it affects all the issues that I'm going to talk about. There's a debate whether this is the 1930s. Bibi has made reference to 1939, Paris 36, others. I do not believe it's in the 1930s. It's not the 1930s because you have a Jewish state with a Jewish army and a Jewish Air Force and a Jewish Navy. It's not the 1930s because Jewish communities can be rescued, as the Jews of Russia and Iraq and Iran and Yemen and Ethiopia and Syria, who would have been written off to Jewish history, have all come home. It's the prophetic vision of the ingathering of the exiles. But there are similarities. And to me, the question is not, is this 38, 39, 36? The question is, what lessons did we learn from that period that we apply to today? Jews look back not to get lost in history as the fundamentalists do. Jews look back in order to look forward. For us, history is not about the past, it's about the future. And this is unique to Judaism. There is no Hebrew word for history. It's zechirah, it's remembrance. And remembrance, unlike history, history is a static thing. You report something happened at this time at that place. Remembrance is a dynamic process. History is what happened to somebody else. Remembrance is what happened to us, even if it didn't happen to us directly. We see it in our prayers. We see it in the Bible all the time, these references. Zechirah gives us the context, this remembrance. It enables us to see through the chaos and see things that the rest of the world doesn't see. That's what Disraeli was talking about. Is that if you understand the lessons of history, we look back in order to spare future generations those trials and tribulations. That we want to learn the lessons of history, not to get lost in the tsaras and the tragedies of the past, but to avoid them in the future. And this is a time, I think, when we are all going to be tested. As you know, today, Ahmadinejad is in New York. The modern-day Hitler, and I don't say that lightly, because if you look at his words and what he says, there are great parallels to the language of Hitler. He gave a speech about 2 weeks ago in which he said, Iran needs to spread beyond its borders. To fulfill our culture and our aspirations, we need more room. We need to go beyond our borders and go closer to the centers of our enemies. Is it language that is familiar? Lebensraum, the language that Hitler used. And like Hitler, who wrote in 1924 and told us everything he was going to do, just nobody took it seriously. He constantly reminded us and told us. He told the world over and over again. Ahmadinejad does the same thing. He tells it to us. He said, I'm going to destroy the Jewish state. I'm going to destroy the United States. Christians, Jews, Muslims who don't agree with him are all the enemies. He's executed hundreds of people this year. Where's the outcry? Because people don't take him seriously. Dictators tell the truth. Leaders of democracies lie, but dictators tell the truth. They tell us what they're going to do, and we just don't believe it. Ahmadinejad is not a clown. I know people dismiss him and say, what do you get concerned? Look at him. His Holocaust denial. Even the Holocaust denial has an intention. Because every time he says it to Europeans, say, no, we killed 6 million, we killed 6 million. He said, that's right, you killed 6 million, but you're coming after me for wanting to do the same thing. Everything he does with intent. Do you know that after the election, he replaced 12,000 mayors in Iran? 12,000. Can you imagine anybody doing that? The Iran Revolutionary Guard controlled the army, the navy, the air force, everything today. Not Khomeini. This is a shrewd guy. And look at his global outreach. If you think that Iran is a danger in the Middle East, today it is a global danger. Chavez, his buddy in Venezuela, has now enabled him to spread to 10 countries in South America. Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Chile, even Brazil. Look at Lula's hosting of Ahmadinejad, signing agreements promising to make up the refined fuel if the Americans cut him off. Our good friend Lula. Even Kirchner in Argentina. There are Hezbollah training camps into Mexico. People dismiss it. You don't want to hear it. Read the testimony of Mueller, the head of the FBI, about the guys he's bringing across our border. If you think the Mexican immigration problem is, you don't know about their problem. Because these are trained terrorists. And what happened in New York may be a fluke to some. But wait till you find out all the details. In Africa, I was in South Africa last month. All they talk about is Iran today. When you look in Somalia and Eritrea, if you think these pirates are doing a good job, when they captured 20 boats in a single weekend, wait till you see what the Iranians do there when they're building their bases with missiles in Angola, in Somalia, Eritrea, in the Straits of Hormuz. Do you know that an Iranian reconnaissance plane last Sunday buzzed within 1,000 feet the aircraft carrier, the Eisenhower? And what if they shot it down? What would have been the repercussions? They revealed a new speedboat during the Great Prophet V exercises that they did last week. Nobody in America bothered to report on these massive exercises. They revealed new missiles, surface-to-surface and air-to-surface missiles, sea-to-surface missiles. And this new speedboat that can't be detected by radar. You remember when they had the little boats go after our ships when they were coming through the Straits of Hormuz last year? Now they have the boats that can carry it out. And they can be outfitted with missiles, they can be outfitted with torpedoes and with other things. And I tell you this not so you remember the details, but to understand the aggressive nature of the capacity he's building. He has built this massive missile infrastructure. He has ballistic missiles today that can hit any part of Europe and the Middle East. And will, even by estimates of the Defense Department finally, in the next 3 years have capacity to hit the United States. During the military parade that was held when he had his summit to counter the summit that President Obama held on non-proliferation. By the way, the one in Washington was attended by 47 countries. The one in Tehran had 60 countries, including France and Turkey and China and Russia. All went to Tehran at the invitation of this murderer. He's the leading executioner of women and children, but they elected Iran to the Commission on the Status of Women this week at the United Nations. I mean, these things you say to people and then they say, oh, you know, everything is important. It's not irrelevant. Because of what this guy's global aspirations, he's seeking hegemony in the region. Go to any Arab leader. I met with 3 in the last 10 days or 2 weeks. Every one of them only talks about Iran. Because of their infiltration into countries. You saw the case in Egypt, 65 people were sentenced to jail in the last 10 days. Because he tried to undermine the regime. They were going to blow up ships in the Suez Canal, attack Tel Aviv from Sinai, and so that the blame would go on Egypt, go into Alexandria and into Cairo for massive terrorist attacks. He did it in Azerbaijan. He's doing it in Kazakhstan. Thank God those are the places that it was caught. We don't even know the places where it isn't. The war in Yemen with the Houthis has nothing to do with the Houthis. This is a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia about the future of the Middle East. It was a test by him. And the Iran Revolutionary Guard have brought in al-Qaeda now and are working together there. Because this is a war that he wants between his Sunni and Shiites. You know that his ideology is based on the Mahdi, who died in the 9th century, the hidden imam. But to bring him back, you need a cataclysmic event. So when he says he's ready for half of Iran to be destroyed, he means it. Because it's part of his ideology. He speaks to this guy. How are you going to argue rationally with somebody who's answering to the hidden imam? I could talk for you for 2 hours about Iran, and I know that we don't have the time now. But every detail is important to understand the true nature of what he's doing and the liaison. Now look at what the impact on Turkey, which has doubled its trade, which is doing joint exercises with Syria, with Iran. And the goal there is, just as he talks about the resurrection of the Persian Empire, Erdogan in Turkey talks about the resurrection of the Ottoman Empire. And he said, who destroyed the Ottoman Empire? Ataturk. And what was Ataturk? A Jew. And so it was the Jews who undermined it, just as he says it was the Jews who undermined the Persian Empire. Do you know when they changed their name from Persia to Iran? Does anybody know? It was when? 1935. In identification with the Nazis, they took the Farsi form of Aryan, which is Iran. So there is a history to be worried about. And it's true, Jews have lived there for 2,600 years and he's not going after the Jews. Why? Because a few years ago he arrested 13 Jews, if you remember, and he charged them with espionage. Guys who were shoe clerks, I mean, guys who didn't even have telephones, and he said they're using sophisticated equipment. The wife of one of them yelled to reporters as they were marching him in, give him your cell phone, see if he knows what it is. But you know where all 13 are today? Every year they executed 1 or 2 Jews since 1979 to remind the Jews, starting with El Ghanian in 1979. But those 13 Jews are home with their families today. Some here, some in Israel, some stayed in Iran yet. Hundreds of Baha'is, Muslims, and Christians are being executed every year But since then, he hasn't touched a Jew. Because he learned a lesson that if you touch the Jews, the whole world comes down on you. Because the rest of the world doesn't care. We're the only ones who protest when he executes Christians, and it's bad for us to do it because then he identifies it as a Zionist plot, and therefore they don't, that he can tie it in to all the enemy theories that he has and conspiracies. But even the most extreme regime can't stand against the Jews when you're united, because everybody joined us, and I had the privilege of coordinating the effort around the world. We had 66 countries mobilized, including many Muslim and Arab countries who interceded and did things that are remarkable. But you're dealing with a dictatorship, and Ahmadinejad means what he says, and he's extending the capacity to achieve it. His missile delivery, the nuclear system, and I assume in this audience I don't have to talk about how far he has advanced and what these missile bases, the nuclear installments underground, some of them under 30 feet of concrete, and how he's adding centrifuges. The new ones aren't working so well, but he has enough now for a dirty bomb. And he will be producing enough. He just signed a deal with Zimbabwe to mine uranium there in exchange for providing oil, because he can't refine his own oil, so he has to sell it. But he imports 40% of his oil from Europe. So if you want to bring him down, sanctions can work. Had we wanted to really support the people who were the forces for democracy in Iran after this election, or when the students went out a few years ago, Iran would not be the same Iran today. The problem is that the West didn't help. We did everything to defeat them. We didn't stand with the young people. We didn't stand with the people who risked their lives. Why weren't there demonstrations everywhere carrying the pictures of all of those who were killed and executed last summer? Because they stood for democracy. And the message to him and to all the terrorists is that the West lacks will and determination. And you read Osama bin Laden's first tape, he says that. If you read Hania's remarks of Hamas, if you read comments of many of them, they all make this point, that the West lacks will and determination, and that the West lacks patience. We want everything over in 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and most of the miniseries, nothing longer. But that's not the way the world works. And they say we can wait 1,000 years, but we'll win. When Hariri investigation got underway, the murder of the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and everything pointed to Assad, Ahmadinejad told him in an account that was later published, he said, just wait them out. You'll see they'll lose interest. Don't give in, don't give information, don't do anything. Just wait. What happened? He walks away, gets the French and Americans and everybody. We're sending an ambassador to Syria. After he's sending Scuds to Hezbollah, we're rewarding him. So the message is about Iran. It's not just about Iran. It's a much broader picture. It's a much greater danger. People don't take it seriously. But believe me, he is not being deterred by words, only by deeds. And if the Europeans would have lived up to the sanctions which our government has implemented, if we had stood up against him when he did his outreach as in Africa and Yemen and South America and all these places, when our own interests, when the Alavi Foundation can give huge grants to Columbia University, NYU, and all these places, when all of a sudden he gets invited to speak at Columbia, and the next week they got a $100,000 contribution from the Alavi Foundation. I could give you 50 more examples of what is entailed. But no, this is the leading state sponsor of terror. Hezbollah is not just in Lebanon, it's in 30 countries in the world. And he has the capacity. He has provided 42,000 missiles to Hezbollah on Israel's north. Secretary Gates, the Secretary of Defense, said this week that it's more than most nations have. There are very few countries that have the missile capacity that Hezbollah has, in addition to Hamas having now at least 12,000 missiles. And the addition of the Scuds would raise that to an even greater level of danger. So I think Iran is a defining issue of our time. But it's not a defining Jewish issue. The one success I think we've had is to show the world that this is a world issue, that he poses a danger to everyone, not just to Israel. And the discussion now is the threat to Jordan, Egypt, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. And frankly, he's a greater danger to them than to Israel, because Israel can defend themselves. And every Arab leader said to me, the greatest threat we have is a weakened Israel. You know that after Israel took out the Syrian nuclear reactor 18 months ago, or about 2 years ago, Not one Arab country criticized it. Do you think about that? Israel bombed Syria. The only Arab country to criticize it was Syria. Now think about what it means. Because they know that Israel is their front line of defense. I was sitting in the Prime Minister's office when somebody called him during the Operation Cast Lead, and they said, decimate him. Stop holding back. They were angry about the war in Lebanon, not because of what Israel did, but because of what Israel didn't do. So Iran is a defining issue, but it's not a defining Jewish issue. It's a world issue. There is a defining Jewish issue today. And that's the campaign of delegitimization against Israel and the Jewish people. And I know there'll be some of you who will say, I don't know what he's talking about. I haven't experienced it. Why don't I see it? If you don't see it, it's because your eyes aren't open. Because we have defense mechanisms that kick in. There was a House of Commons in Britain report that was published in December 2007. And it was done by 3 non-Jewish members of the House of Commons, McShane, Dunn, and now I forgot the third one's name. And you know the story about putting your watch down. The guy comes to a synagogue and with a Japanese guest, and the Japanese guest asks the rabbi, sees the rabbi when it comes to the Shema, he covered his eyes. He said, what does that mean? He said, oh, he's concentrating. And when it came to the modim and he bowed down, he said, what is that? He says, well, we prostrate before God. He goes through all the things. And when it came time to the sermon, the rabbi put his watch down on the podium and he said, what does that mean? He said, not a damn thing. So, I'm still in New York time, so I have plenty of time. It doesn't matter. This is going to be a defining issue for which we will be held to account. Because it is a global effort to deny legitimacy to the Jewish state as the corporate entity representing the Jewish people. That it's still not politically correct to say I hate Jews, but you can say I hate Israel, or I hate Zionists. But none of us should be fooled. The attack on Israel is an attack on the Jewish people. To deny legitimacy to the Jewish state is to say that Jews don't have the rights of all other people. To say the Jewish state doesn't have the sovereignty of others says that Jews are not entitled to the sovereignty that others enjoy. The study done by these 3 members of the House of Commons talked about the poisonous atmosphere on the campuses of Great Britain. It talked about the difficulty of putting a pro-Israel speaker on the campuses. It talked about the fact that a Jew was 4 times more likely to be the victim of a hate crime than a Muslim in Great Britain. It talked about the increase in number of anti-Semitic attacks coming from it. And it even makes reference to a term I coined about the poisoning of the elites, which means that it starts in the top of society. And people say, how come we don't see it? And I told them it's like a tumor that grows quietly, and by the time you discover it, it's too late. And it trickles down, not like an economy. This is a real trickle down in terms of public opinion. So in Great Britain, support for Israel is about 15% today. When asked to name the most disgusting country in the world, 59% said Israel. When who are the greatest enemies of peace? Iran and Israel, but Israel beat Iran by 2%. The number of anti-Semitic attacks in England doubled last year. In France, doubled. In Holland, doubled. The highest number since they started keeping records after World War II, including physical assaults. I'm not talking about minor skirmishes. I'm talking about physical assaults and attacks. In 2001, there was the Durban Conference, convened by the United Nations to fight xenophobia, bigotry, hatred, and it was hijacked and became an orgy of hatred against the Jewish people in the state of Israel. So much so that even Mary Robinson, who's not a great friend of ours and was chair of the conference, said, I am a Zionist, when she saw the kind of bigoted attacks, the hatred, street demonstrations with T-shirts that said, if Hitler, the tragedy of Hitler's death the good thing is that there would have been no Jews. The bad thing is you wouldn't have a Volkswagen Beetle. Kind of literature that you saw there was like Goebbels. But the most important thing is that we saw the blueprint for the attack that we have seen over this decade. And they laid it out very blatantly. They said, just as we got rid of the apartheid South African state, we're going to get rid of the apartheid in the 20th century, we're going to get rid of the Zionist apartheid state in the 21st century. It's not a coincidence that Jimmy Carter used the word apartheid in the title of his book. It's not a coincidence that they now are doing campaigns and called us, in fact, Mearsheimer, Professor Mearsheimer, in this week wrote an article in which he talks about the new Afrikaners and named myself, including Dershowitz and Marty Peretz and all sorts of other people. The new Afrikaners. This is a deliberate campaign of delegitimization. And they laid it out there very clearly. And everything they said, we're going to use the same tactics. You know what the BDS is? Boycott, divestment, sanctions. It's a global movement. They take Israeli products off the shelves. In Norway, they put little yellow labels on Israeli products. They go through supermarkets in France and de-shelve products, and they started it here. Everything was made very clear at Durban, but the world didn't take it seriously. And what they said has been implemented. But it's not just in Europe. And again, this is a subject that requires a much longer address, and I know the time is running quickly. You know that a Jew in America is 7 times more likely than a Muslim to be the victim of a hate crime. The number of anti-Semitic attacks in America doubled. That you cannot put a pro-Israel speaker on many campuses in America. And you here at the University of California have had some really serious problems with divestment and with other attacks. And as you know, with speakers who were being prevented from speaking. But we hear it all over the country. The fact that 2 professors can write a textbook, 1 million copies have been sold of Walter Mearsheimer's book, which is full of historical inaccuracies. I mean, so many mistakes. When they first published the summary of it, that the National Review of Books in England published, it's not so prestigious as it sounds, because no American publisher would take it, not because the Zionists tried to block him, because nobody thought it was of any value. So many, the footnotes, they have 1,000 footnotes, not one an original source. No high school teacher would accept it. They make many references to me. I didn't read it, but I know that they made many references to me, and the reporter said to them, did you call these people? They said, no, because we already know the answer. But it's used as a textbook from Harvard to the University of California. Here in California, it's used as a textbook with no refuting documents. So these lies and distortions and misrepresentations, and their goal is to intimidate us, it's to silence us. And it's not because we did something wrong. It's not because the Jewish lobby is pernicious effort. It's what American democracy demands of us. It says if you care as an American, get involved. And it says minorities have a right to have a say, even a disproportionate say. Because it's people who care who are heard. And again, this is not an ideological issue. It's not a political, partisan differences are irrelevant here. This is a goal to try to separate us out, to undermine us. We see the lawfare campaign. You see the campaign around the Goldstone report. You see the distortions and how a country that is fighting democracy and fighting against terrorism is equated with the terrorists. How a democracy and a terrorist organization are treated the same if, in fact, the democracy isn't treated worse. We are seeing modern blood libels. You know what the #2 best-selling book in the world today is after the Bible? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. 120 languages. If you see what goes on satellite systems, on broadcasts coming out of the Arab world and coming today in Europe, the campaign you've seen about Israel and Jews engaging in organ stealing. And when it appeared in the Swedish paper, everybody said, what do you care? What are you gonna? It's been reproduced all over the world. And today there's a modern call. There was a film made in Syria that was broadcast last week in Syria and Turkey and across the Arab world. And it's a thing about how the Israelis went to Haiti to harvest organs. People believe it. Words of violence lead to deeds of violence. And if you inculcate a generation in hatred, the results we know come out very clearly. There was the libel that Israel denied water to the Palestinians. Everybody excited, went to the United Nations, and it turns out that Israel gives double the water they're required to give them. But they're poisoning the aquifers, and they're complaining because Israel doesn't want to see all the garbage dumped in the water, which is poisoning. They offered them desalination plant. They offered them access. All these things not reported, not talked about. And it's not that Israel shouldn't be held to a higher standard. It's not that Israel doesn't make mistakes. We all know everybody makes mistakes. Israel is not Disneyland. Sometimes it's Never Neverland, but it's not Disneyland. But its record can stand against any country in the world. The behavior of its soldiers can be measured against any country of the world. And you see the libels that are being the libels that are being brought against us, the charges, the use of lawfare, where you abuse international law against Israel, against democracies, against the United States. And while Israel may be the first victim, it won't be the last. Now you're going to see cases, as there are 1,000 against Israelis in Europe today, being brought against American troops who serve in peacekeeping forces or in Afghanistan or in Iraq. The idea of universal jurisdiction that Goldstone tried to promote. We see the resurrection of Zionism racism in its new forms. We see the Human Rights Council of the United Nations pass 12 resolutions, 4 last month. Did they deal with the massacre of Christians in Nigeria, or animists and Christians in the Sudan, or the violations in China, or what Iran is doing? No, all 4, as all 12 last year, dealt with Israel. But it's not a surprise when Libya sits in the chair of the Human Rights Council and has vice chairmen like Iran and Cuba, you don't got a fair shake likely. But even National Geographic did an expose about the diminution of Christian populations in the Middle East. And what did they say was the cause of it? Israel. What's the one place in the Middle East where the Christian population has increased in the last 40 years? Only Israel. Muslim countries drive them out, but National Geographic said, no, it's Israel's fault. Who protected the Christians in Lebanon? And when Israel couldn't protect them anymore, we know what happened. We see the if only Israel crowd. If only Israel would make more concessions. If only Israel did this. If only Israel. They don't look at all the concessions that Israel's made. They withdrew from Gaza, only meant you got Hamas stand. You withdrew from Lebanon, you got Hezbollah stand. They've offered back 99%, as Omar did, as Barak did, as they did with Clinton, as they tried in all of the agreements. It's because they didn't have a partner. And yet, the blame is only placed on one party. We have seen this throughout our history. It's prototypes that go back to our forefathers. Again, why we learn history, because Abraham was told you cannot live amongst us as a Jew. Isaac was told you cannot live amongst us. And Jacob was told you cannot live. They compare Israelis to Nazis because this assuages their guilt. They say, you see, anybody in this circumstance would do the same thing. And so therefore our silence during World War II was not unusual. The Israelis behave in these outrageous ways. They talk about the boycott of Gaza. Every one of you has heard it, right? How Israel boycotts, doesn't let in humanitarian goods and all of the things. Last week, 773 truckloads went into Gaza. The week before, 685 truckloads. Every week, hundreds and hundreds of truckloads of aid goes in from Israel to Gaza. The daughter of the number 2 man in Hamas was brought to Israel for medical treatment, despite the fact that they're holding Gilad Shalit, was brought to Israel for medical treatment and then transferred to Jordan, though they could have held her for ransom. Hundreds of Palestinians come from Gaza every week for treatment in Israel and go back. Those are the stories you don't hear. And I heard somebody mention Shaare Tzedek, which we should plug for sure. But we have to remember the competition as well. What I'm saying to you is that the issue of delegitimization is about us. It's not about Israel. It's Israel, the corporate entity that represents us. And to me, this is the defining Jewish issue of our time. And this is the issue your grandchildren are going to ask about, because they will pay the price for what we do or for what we fail to do in this critical time. Each of us has to make a judgment of what we do and how we meet the challenges. I wanted to talk about, obviously there's so much more to reference about it. And of course, the overriding concern of the last few weeks has been the U.S.-Israel relationship. But with all the difficulties that there are, and sometimes tensions even between the closest of friends, and we have to remember that every administration, even Ronald Reagan, we had Bitburg and you had AWACS, there's always going to be areas of tension and difference. But the fact is that the U.S.-Israel relationship on a day-to-day basis is far greater and better than the media would lead you to believe. Do you know what is happening on a military basis every day between Israel and the United States? How Israeli intelligence, Israeli equipment, Israeli improvements are saving lives of our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. And how the cooperation expressed in Operation Juniper Cobra